Hello and welcome to The Debrief. This is the show where we meet the creatives who are shaping Detroit. I'm your co-host. My name is Seth Ressler.
And I'm Becky Scarcello.
And today, Becky, we're actually meeting a guy who shaped Detroit. I mean,
for sure.
Quite a bit.
Yes.
He's kind of a big deal. He is a broadcasting legend. This is a guy that many people in the Detroit area will know. I, as a transplant, actually, I was joking with him before we started recording. I wasn't here when he was on the air, right? So I am mostly familiar with him through the Comedy Central show Detroiters. But he has a brand new autobiography that goes through his broadcasting career. I actually just listened to it.
And I read it.
And you read it.
Yeah, so we came both ways. Yeah.
He narrates his own autobiography, which I love.
Fantastic.
And I love these broadcasting autobiographies. As a radio broadcaster myself for many years, I loved going through and reading, the biographies of Howard Stern and of, just all these legendary broadcasters. So I really enjoyed this book.
Yeah, it was a great read.
Let's bring on our guest. He is the Emmy award-winning anchor, or was for nearly 2 decades, at Channel 4 News in Detroit, and he's got a new memoir. It is called Anchored. Welcome to the show, the legendary Mort Crim. Hi, Mort.
Thank you, and good to see you. And you're probably wondering why I narrated my own autobiography. You know what it costs to hire a narrator?
There's unions involved.
I'm too frugal, so I did it myself.
I got to tell you, every time I listen to somebody who does, there's a game I like to play, which is see if you can identify the overdubs. When you went back and yours are hard to spot, right? It's not like Anthony Bourdain when you're like, oh, he just had a cigarette break and all of a sudden his voice drops 3 octaves. You did a great job.
Thank you. It was a 4-day project. We did about 4 hours a day of recording, and I'll tell you, by the end of that 4th day, I didn't have much voice left.
I can imagine.
Well, look, here's what we're getting into today, because obviously Detroit knows you so well. We wanted to see if we could hunt down some things that maybe Detroiters might not know about you.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to see, because we combed through the autobiography, and like I said, it's a fantastic story.
There's so much in there and so many great little nuggets. So we narrowed it down to 7 surprising things that our audience might not know about Mort Crim. So we thought
things that I don't know that I'll be qualified to answer.
We'll find out. For you, it's a test of memory.
It's your life. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Fire away.
Okay. Number 1, you play the accordion. Can you tell us more about that?
The definition of a gentleman is someone who owns an accordion and does not play it. I have been a keyboard person all of my life. I started playing the piano when I was just a child and had 3 years of piano lessons. Probably should have had many more, but I have a good ear for music, so I can pretty much anything that I can hear, I can pretty much play. And then I got into playing the organ, go over to my dad's church on the weekdays when there wasn't anybody there, and play jazz on the organ. And then it kind of, I don't even remember what prompted me to pick up the accordion, but one day I did. I bought one. I remember buying it at a used, I think it was a pawn shop. And so I bought this old accordion. I thought, what's a keyboard? And of course, you had to learn the buttons. The chords are done by buttons rather than keys. So you had right-hand keyboard, left-hand buttons. So that took some getting used to, but it was kind of fun.
And where did you play this set accordion? I think it features into your early life, dropping out of high school.
I dropped out of high school when I was 15. I was not doing well. I was bored with school. I had a knee injury, and that knocked me out of football my sophomore year in high school. And for a whole lot of reasons, I won't go into all of them because they are in the book. And of course, we want people to buy the book and get all the details. But I dropped out of school and traveled with my uncle, who was an evangelist. He played the electric guitar and sang and preached. And so he told me, bring your accordion along, and you and I will do duets. And during the when they're taking up the offering, we can play musical instruments, and when I'm singing, you can accompany me on the accordion. So I traveled for several months, a better part of a year, took correspondence courses so I didn't get behind in school. And yes, I did ultimately graduate from high school and college and graduate school. But, it was a long and winding road from those early days, traveling with him and playing the accordion.
It's fascinating. Okay. Number 2 surprising thing. You were friends with Colonel Sanders of Kentucky Fried Chicken fame.
Yes. My first anchor job was at WHAS television in Louisville, Kentucky, where I met Colonel Sanders, who lived in suburban Shelbyville, right out of Louisville. And he and I ended up being members of a state board. I believe it was an arthritis board. It was a charity. And we got to be friends. And I discovered that he was watching me on television every night. We were his favorite channel. And when my first book came out, Like It Is, I presented the Colonel with an autographed copy of it. His wife, Claudia, later told me that the Colonel took that book with him whenever he traveled, said he loved to read out of that book. It was just short stories. And anyway, we became such good friends that the 100th running of the Kentucky Derby, he invited, I was in Philadelphia at KYW. My co-anchor was Vince Leonard. Our sportscaster was Al Meltzer. Vince and I owned a plane in partnership. And he and Al and I got in the plane and flew to Louisville and were Colonel Sanders' guests in his home and sat in his private box at the 100th running of the Kentucky Derby. And the next morning, the Colonel called us about 6 o'clock and he said, "You boys get down here, I'm making breakfast." And he and his wife had this old antebellum home, very nice home in Shelbyville. Not ostentatious or elaborate, but just a nice, very nice home. And they each had their own kitchen, because the Colonel was really quite a cook, and he had made up wheat germ pancakes and homemade biscuits with red-eye gravy, and I mean, it was a feast that he made for us. I don't know how many people, my acquaintances, can say that Colonel Sanders made their breakfast.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Let me ask you about Louisville, because I am like you. I have been a broadcaster, and I have done the same thing that you did, which is you move from town to town to town every so often. And for a lot of broadcasters,
job either. Huh?
No, I couldn't.
No.
I mean, almost
neither.
none are longer than 3 years. But New York is kind of the big place to be, and you made it to New York in radio, which is the number one market, and then you made a decision to go to Louisville, which is not the number one market. Talk about that decision and why that made sense for you in your career at the time.
Yeah, in those years, Louisville was the 39th market, and not only had I been fortunate to make it to New York at a top radio station, WNEW, but the last 5 years of my career there, I was at the network. And ABC Radio at that time was the number one radio network. NBC and CBS had pretty much a lock on the evening news with Walter Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley on NBC. But when it came to radio network news, there wasn't anybody close to ABC. They were the top of the heap. They had Paul Harvey, of course, and Bob Considine. They had Edward P. Morgan, some of the really big names in an era that you two certainly might have read about in your broadcast history books, but you wouldn't remember it. But I was fortunate to make it to ABC Radio, and I had the top morning newscast, coast to coast at 8 o'clock, 15 minutes, news around the world. But I was in my mid-30s, and it occurred to me, if I'm going to get into television, I better be making some moves. And the problem was that I was doing so well for ABC Radio that they were not interested in moving me out of radio, because we had some very good sponsorships, and it was a money issue. So I'd gotten acquainted with Walter Cronkite because we covered the space program for our respective networks. I was down with Merrill Muller. The two of us were the space team for ABC Radio. Cronkite was there, of course, for CBS. And I'd also gotten to know him through some committees that we served on together. So I called him one day and I said, "Walter, I need some advice." And he said, "Come on over." I went into his office, and he said, well, it's going to be real tough to move from a top radio network anchor position to a top television anchor position. That's just not going to happen. I said, I recognize that. He said, have you considered local television? I said, no. I've been doing national for 5 years. I hadn't thought about local. He said, well, they need good people in these local markets. And he said, that would be a good way to get some experience, get some exposure, build your resume. And he said, I have a friend in Louisville who owns the Courier Journal and Times newspapers, and they own a television station. And long story short, I guess it's already too late for that. I've already. He called his friend Barry Bingham, and soon after that, I got a call from the news director at WHAS and sent him an audition tape and got the job. And that was the beginning of my television career. 1969. I had just covered Apollo 12. Was the last of the Apollo moonshots that I covered for ABC, and had to watch 13 and all that excitement with the explosion on the way to the moon and Jim Lovell, magnificently getting that craft back on Earth. Had to watch that like the rest of the country did on television, because I was then firmly ensconced as a local anchor in Louisville, Kentucky.
Wow. Yeah. One of the things that struck me as I was listening to your book and really resonated with me was your shifting motivations when it came to your career choices throughout life. And this is something that I'm starting to feel as, I get a little older too, is that when I was in my 20s and 30s, it was like whatever's good for the career, that's what we're doing, and we'll move wherever. And then there start to be other factors at play. There are things like family. There are these other considerations. Some things look really good on paper. Oh, this market's going to be great because it's a huge market. And then it doesn't turn out that way. And so you're starting to look for the things that make you happy as opposed to the things that are the best career move on paper. And that really resonated with me listening to the book.
Me too. And you mentioned Paul Harvey. So that leads me to the number 3 surprising things. So legendary broadcaster Paul Harvey, he was also pivotal in a couple of your career choices, different times in your life. Can you tell everyone who he is and what those moments were like?
Well, when Paul Harvey was on the radio, and he was on for probably 40 years, he died in the late 90s. Maybe the early 2000s. I attended his funeral. I can't recall exactly when it was, several years ago, but he was 92 and still broadcasting at that age. He was, you used the word legend. He truly was a legend. He had more audience for his radio show than Walter Cronkite had for his CBS Evening News program. He was bigger than, of course, Rush Limbaugh had not appeared on the scene at that time, but he was the biggest thing in radio. He had a daily morning show at 8:30 for 5 minutes and a noon show for 15 minutes. And then he did a feature called The Rest of the Story, which I think maybe some stations are still running that. But Paul also gave me some advice when I was a young college student and studying to be a minister, but not sure that my father was a minister and not sure whether that was really my calling, whether, I had a very strong sense that life is important and that choices matter and that what we do with our lives has ultimate meaning and value. So that was always something in my life and in my DNA and my makeup and my background and my training that sometimes made it very, very difficult, because I would be pulled one way by what I wanted to do and pulled another way by what I felt morally and ethically and religiously I should do. So I was in that dilemma in South Bend, Indiana. I was studying theology. I was pastoring a church as a young student minister, and attending Notre Dame and taking taking courses in speech and communications, and attending Bethel Bible College in Mishawaka at the same time, and taking Bible studies, Bible courses. So I think right there was a strong indication that I hadn't made up my mind. I just didn't know which way I was going to go, broadcasting or the ministry. So I wrote the letter to Paul Harvey. I had been a local announcer on a station that carried his network shows. Never thought I'd hear back from him because he was so big and I was just a student. But I got a personal letter back from him a few days later, and he said, why don't you come to Chicago? It's about a 90-mile drive from South Bend to Chicago. Sit in on the newscast, and I'll take you and your wife to lunch, and we'll talk. And we did that. And it was very exciting, very exhilarating, and very helpful for me as a young, confused student who didn't know which way I should go, which way I would go. And he took us to lunch with his wife, Angel, who he described as his number one advisor. And I think that was probably true. And he said, I can't really tell you. And Paul grew up in a strict religious background, very similar to mine. So he kind of had a feel for, the two things that I was being torn between. He said, I can't tell you what you should do with your life, whether you should go into broadcasting or become a clergyman. But he said, I can tell you that our profession needs good, competent, honest young people to come into it. And ultimately, I did go into broadcasting. And as you know from reading the book, and maybe I'm getting ahead of one of your other questions, but ultimately I was tabbed by ABC to be Paul's successor when he retired, which he never did. And there is an interesting chapter in the book that I'm not going to reveal any more about it, but it's called The Rest of the Story. And it will tell you some things you didn't know about me or Paul Harvey.
Yeah, that surprised me.
It was fascinating. Yeah.
That's one of my favorite chapters.
Me too.
Yes, so. Yes. Okay, number 4. We're going to ask you about an alternative universe where Mr. Mort Crim is a successful politician. What would that look like?
Early in my life, I had a grandfather who was a judge, a very successful judge, in that for 40 years nobody would even oppose him. He was down in a little town, West Frankfort, Illinois, where I was born. And so there were strong political influences on me growing up. And of course, in the news business, you are immersed in politics, and that's a big part of what you cover as a journalist, locally or nationally. So I was always fascinated by politics. And there was a time when I went to Louisville, in the back of my mind, one of the things I thought about was, if I would decide to get into politics, being a local anchorman in a city like Louisville would give me a lot of the one thing politicians all crave, which is name recognition and credibility. And as a matter of fact, that did happen. And I think had I stayed in Louisville, the possibility of running for Congress would have been very plausible. Later in Detroit, I was approached informally by some Republican donors and some Democrat donors about running for Congress. And I took it as a compliment that neither party seemed to know what my politics was, because they both felt comfortable inquiring as to whether I would run, one asking me if I would run as a Republican, the other if I'd run as a Democrat. I thought, well, I must be playing pretty much straight down the middle, because nobody seems to know what my political leanings are, although I certainly had them and have them. But then there was a serious offer that came from a person who was very big in the Blanchard administration, became a major fundraiser for the party statewide. And he and a colleague of his took Rainey and me to lunch one day, and they said, we want you to consider running for governor. And if you do, we've already got $1 million pledged for your campaign. And so I had just started my business. I just started Mort Crim Communications, and had just started syndicating my radio series, Second Thoughts. And the timing couldn't have been worse. And it was just not something that I could seriously. And I was still on television at that time. And all of that would have changed. I would have had to go off of television, give up the syndicated radio, sell the business, which was just a startup. It would have been very difficult to untangle from that. So we didn't do it. But it was a serious offer. It was a serious overture. And I'm not sure. I would have been running against John Engler, and he had already himself in his first term of governor, was quite popular in the state. As a matter of fact, did run the second term. The party ended up with Jeffrey Feiger as their candidate here. And I told some of my Democratic friends, I said, if I had known how desperate the party was going to be, I could have done it from Jeff.
That's a good point. Okay, number 5. Some of your biggest fans are in prison. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, some of my colleagues ought to be. But,
you can name names. That's fine.
That's fine. Give it all up.
Terry Opria, who was just an excellent producer and a very good friend, and ultimately ended up working for me at Mort Crim Communications. And when I sold the company, he bought the company, and he has since sold the company and retired. But Terry was my producer when prison riots broke out at 3 of the state's prisons, up at Marquette, which was heavy duty. That was where they put the worst of the worst. Jackson Prison and Ionia. And for some reason, there were prison riots breaking out at all 3 prisons at the same time. I guess word gets around among the prisoners what's going on, and it kind of sparked a chain reaction. So we got in my airplane and we flew to all 3 of these cities and got footage and interviews of all 3 prison riots for our news that evening. But in Marquette, that's where they have the murderers and the rapists, and I mean they're really, really bad dudes. Are all sent to Marquette's maximum security prison. So the warden took us out onto the riot was over by the time we got there. Things had calmed down, and a bunch of the inmates were out on the diamond in the recreational area playing softball. And when they saw Terry and me and our camera crew and the warden, they stopped playing, and a bunch of the guys started running toward us. Now, normally that would have been kind of a little unsettling, but I figured the warden wasn't upset, so I wouldn't be. And this one guy came over, and he threw his arm around me, and they're all saying, "Hey, Mort, we watch you." Well, I found out that we were cabled into, as we were in many of the areas of Michigan. They picked us up on cable, Channel 4 on cable. So this one big burly guy puts his arm around me. He says, "Mort, I love you. I'm your biggest fan. I want to get your picture with me." And so our photographer obliged, took a video. And as we're walking back to the warden's office, the warden is kind of chuckling. And I said, "What's funny?" He said, "You know that guy that put his arm around you and said he was your biggest fan? Said, he's doing life. He's an axe murderer."
Oh, jeez. Let me tell you, it's a good thing you didn't have a political career, because if you did, that would have shown up in an ad.
Channel 7, but I didn't know how many axe murderers Bill Barnes could count among his fans.
You won there.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. Number 6, sitcom called Hamtramck existed that almost derailed your visit to Poland to see the Pope. Can you tell us about that story?
Yeah, we, and again, Terry Opria was my producer on that trip to Krakow. And when Pope John Paul, who was a native of Poland, made a return visit to his home country, we went over to cover it because, of course, Hamtramck has a large Polish population. And we always tried to do international trips that had for example, we went to Israel because there was a large, not only Jewish population, but in Dearborn, a huge Arab population, Palestinian population. So a story in that part of the world would have intense local interest in Detroit. Well, that's the way it was with the Polish Pope going back to visit his homeland. We knew there would be a lot of interest, and so we went over to do some reporting on it. When we, I don't know how many people in Detroit will remember the show Hamtramck, but it was designed to be a comedy. They were hoping it would be a pilot for an ongoing series, but the jokes just didn't set well with the Hamtramck community. What was meant to be satire Satire can be very tricky, and sometimes parody and satire don't work. And that's what happened with this show. There was no ill will on the part of the people who produced it. They thought they were doing something funny that would be appreciated and enjoyed, and that the jokes would be shared by the members of the Polish community. That was not the case. They eventually had to apologize. There were street demonstrations, and picket signs went up around the station. It was a disaster. And drew good ratings because of the controversy. But boy, as a public relations gaffe, it was major. So we get to Poland, and we step off the plane, and we meet Grażna. I don't remember her last name, but Grażna was the interpreter and driver that we had hired to take Terry and the camera crew and myself around Poland and cover the Pope. And Grażna met us at the plane, and she was livid. She said, "I'm not working for you people." She said, "You have insulted the Polish people, and I'm not working for anybody." So apparently CNN International had picked up the story of our show Hamtramck, and it about sabotaged our ability to cover the Pope. But Terry, he cajoled her, and I think maybe increased what we were paying her a little bit. And
yeah.
explained to her that, Hamtramck was produced by the programming division, had nothing to do with the news department. So right. he managed to get us free of that particular stigma, and we were able to do some good reporting.
Crazy.
Wow. I'm surprised it's not on Hulu or DVD. Maybe we're going to have to hunt that down.
We might have to look for that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if it's available or not. It may be that all of the originals were destroyed.
It could be.
Buried with the ET Atari cartridges.
Erased all trace. Yeah. Yeah. So I have another Detroit connection to ask you about. You have an interesting relationship to Jack White. Tell us about that.
I recorded my Second Thoughts syndicated series at Ron Rowe's studio, but we eventually built our own studio at our facilities. But before that, we rented a studio from Ron, and I would do my master tapes there, and then they would duplicate them and send out copies of the recordings we had 1,300 radio stations at one time that were carrying my series. And I guess the people at Ron Rowe's decided they didn't need to keep all these old master tapes. They were done. And we told them, no reason to keep it. We've got copies of everything. Jack White's brother was working at Ron Rowe's. So this is the story as I understand it. I haven't verified this, as the networks say. We haven't verified it.
Okay.
But I understand that Jack White's brother was working there when they got rid of some of these old master tapes. And he said, "Jack has a studio in his home, and let me take these. We'll use them for practice tapes." So he did. And in the process of queuing up one of these tapes, I guess, to record over it, Jack happened to hear one of my commentaries on it. And it was a commentary about a woman who had gone through a painful divorce, and she was very depressed, and she was overwhelmed by money problems and all the things that can go with suddenly being single. And she looked out and saw a little squirrel, and he would get an acorn, and he would run across, and he would bury it, and he would come back and get another acorn. And she decided, I can handle my problems that way, just one at a time, the way that squirrel is moving those acorns. Well, Jack called me, and he said, "I heard this commentary of yours," and he said, "I'd like to build a song around it." Now, my thought was, well, he's going to take the idea and he's going to build a song. And he explained, he said, "No, I want to use your voice. I want to just take a piece of that commentary." Well, it had been professionally recorded at Ron Rowe's, so I didn't have to re-record it. And we worked out a deal. And the upshot is that Little Acorns became a part of the album Elephant, which became a platinum record. I had just around the corner from my office here my own platinum record with my name on it for being a part of the White Stripes album Elephant.
That's impressive.
Good. I know.
Look, I played several songs off that album on the radio. They were huge hits.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So are you doing more of this?
The funny thing is, I didn't know who Jack White was. See, that's not my generation. So I had to call my son, and he said, "Oh, Dad," he said, "he is big." He said, "White Stripes." He said, "They're already number one." He said, "They're going to be number one in America." And he said, "That's really a big deal." So
Mort, Jack White, kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal.
But I understand you didn't make such a very lucrative deal on that.
No, I didn't. But it was fun. I thought I made a really good deal. It's kind of like Colonel Sanders. He sold his business, I think, for $2 million, and it was probably worth $50 million. But he thought, simple guy, grown up selling chicken, and he thought $2 million, I'm rich. And I don't know. They say a person who has himself for a lawyer has a fool for an attorney. And maybe that applies to talent agents. I had a good talent agent in New York, but I thought, I'm not going to bother him with it. It's just, a small potatoes deal.
Yeah.
So are there more records in your future?
Yeah, that isn't the end of your record sampling, is it?
Well, interestingly, I got a call from a Hollywood agent, a young lady, a few weeks ago, and she said, Olivia Rodrigo would like you to record the trailer for her new album. It's going to be her debut album. And my first thought was, what is an Olivia Rodrigo? I took it this was a singer. Obviously, she had an album coming out. Well, it didn't take very many phone calls to my granddaughters, 10 to 20, to find out, hey, she's a really big deal.
Yeah.
18 years old and had starred in some Disney movies and was now breaking out as a top singing sensation. In fact, 3 days after I did the trailer for her album, for the main song on her album, she appeared on Saturday Night Live.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, we did a couple of songs.
Did you get your talent agent involved?
I guess I asked the agent, I said, now, here I am, a retired old grandpa. As a matter of fact, a month ago, I became a great-grandfather.
Oh, wow.
We're going to go see the new great-granddaughter on our way back from the Midwest, back from Michigan next the end of this month.
Nice.
But I said, how in the world did a young, up-and-coming star like Olivia Rodrigo get in touch or have any desire to have this old grandfather down in Florida, retired, do the trailer for her album? And she said, well, it's the White Stripes. She's a big fan of the White Stripes, and she loved your commentary on the Lakers. And she said, I want that voice on my trailer. So you never know.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, do you think we have time for a bonus?
Yeah, last question.
I have one more.
I want to know.
Yes. So this will be our bonus surprising thing. So you talk a lot about your religious beliefs, your spirituality, connection to God in your book, but there's a few things you didn't cover that I want to ask you real quick, what your beliefs are.
Sure.
Do you believe in ghosts?
Do I believe in ghosts?
Yeah. I'm trying to catch you off guard. I think I did.
Yes.
Well, I guess when it comes to the paranormal like that, I would have to say at best I'm agnostic. I tend not to rule out anything because life and this universe are full of so many surprises. Even in my religious beliefs, I have come to accept the mystery. I can't explain everything. And the analogy I use is the love that I have for my children and my family. If you ask me to explain or give a logical rationale for why I love Rini, why I love my children, I couldn't do that. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that I love them and that it's the most real thing in my life. So some of the most real things in our lives are beyond explanation. So when you ask me, do I believe in ghosts? No, but I don't not believe in them.
Let me tell you.
Evidence is out.
We had your former co-anchor, Carmen Harlan, on the podcast. And this came up because a place that I think you know well has significance for you, the Whitney, is supposedly haunted here in Detroit. And so we asked her if she believed in ghosts.
She had a very similar answer.
Yeah, she was cagey too.
Yeah.
Let me tell you this. The Whitney is where my current wife and I had our first date.
Yes, I remember that from the book. That is special. Yes.
We did. The library room there. Yeah.
Okay, how about UFOs?
Yeah. Do you believe in UFOs?
Well, if unidentified flying objects, certainly. I think, hasn't Obama acknowledged that, and even the U.S. Navy, and I think maybe NASA, I think there's been some official recognition. Now, what they are, if we knew what they were, they wouldn't be unidentified flying objects.
That's true.
This is
It
true.
would be UFO. So, yeah, as a matter of fact, I saw one.
Oh.
I saw one. I was a very young man living in southeast Missouri. I was probably 19 or 20. And I was driving near the Mississippi River, and something went over. It wasn't a helicopter. It had windows. It was shaped like a cigar. I didn't see any wings. It was totally silent. And it was just over and gone. And I didn't even have time to think a lot about it. But, in the hours and days ahead, I recognized that I had seen something really, really strange.
There you go.
All right.
How about time travel?
Yeah. Do you think time travel is possible?
Probably. Now you're getting into areas of physics and astrophysics. And
you are such a reporter.
Beyond my pay grade, but I did really enjoy Vincent Price in The Fly.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Good one.
Good.
Okay. Fortune tellers. Do you believe in those?
Yeah. Boy, that's a good question. I think there are people who have an unusual sensory ability, perception. I had a friend who was a professional seer, fortune teller, and she did this for entertainment, but she also did it because she seriously believed that she had this gift. And I remember at a party one time, she and I were represented by the same speakers bureau. And she offered to do readings for all of us. And so she had a little table set up in the bedroom after dinner where we would go in one at a time. And she told me some things that were absolutely chilling because no amount of research, there were some of the things she told me nobody could have known but me. Now, does that mean that she had some kind of a brainwave connection, that things that were stored in my mind, that she was able to tap into these? I don't know. Was it pure luck? Probably not, because of the quantity of information that she had and the things that she, nailed. But that's my only experience personally with this kind of stuff. And I just put that in the category of, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Was she the same one that told you that number that ended up meaning something in Detroit?
622. Yeah, 622. Yes. And when my wife and I drove from Chicago to Detroit, because I'd been offered the job at WDIV, hadn't quite accepted it yet. So we drove to Detroit just to look around, and we drove by the old WDIV before they moved into the new building. And I looked up at the address, and it was 622 West Lafayette. And all of a sudden, the light went on. And I remembered that at this reading that this fortune teller had done, she said, I see the number 622 being very important in your career.
That's pretty wild.
That is wild.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay, last one. Do you know where Jimmy Hoffa's buried?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
But if I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Yeah, don't say anything. I just wanted to know if you knew.
Mort Crim, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate this. This has been a lot of fun. Congratulations on a fantastic career. The book does an excellent job of recounting it all. It is a fantastic read, also a fantastic listen. So consume it either way.
We loved it.
Can I put in a plug for my website? Because
absolutely. Go right ahead.
Please do.
You can get an autographed copy of the book. It's available at Amazon. It's available in bookstores and all of that. But if you want a personally autographed copy from me to you, it's mortcrimspeaks.com. That's the website, mortcrimspeaks.com. And the reason it's not Mort Crim is because I sold that with my company. I don't own my name anymore.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You need to call the talent agent more often.
Yeah.
You need to clear things before you make decisions.
Better decisions.
Mort Crim, thank you so much. It's been great having you on.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you, Seth and Becky, both. It's been fun.
That's it for us. I am Seth Ressler.
I'm Becky Scarcello.
Remember, there's a ton of places where you can get this show. We are on Apple Podcasts. We are on Spotify. You can find episodes on YouTube as well. Until next time, Detroit's moving.
Keep up.